The dust rose in red clouds around Flora Hart's worn leather boots as she took her first step into what would become a 5-mile journey through the scorching New Mexico Territory heat. And she wondered if teaching children their letters was worth dying for. It was September of 1883, and the sun showed no mercy to anyone foolish enough to walk the desert roads at midday. But the children of the scattered ranches and homesteads around St. Elmo needed education, and Flora had signed a contract promising to bring it to them, no matter the cost to her comfort or safety. She adjusted the canvas bag on her shoulder, heavy with primers and slate boards, and started walking north toward the Henderson place. The schoolhouse stood in the center of St. Elmo, a rough mining town that had seen better days when silver still flowed freely from the mountains. Most families lived miles away from town, spread across the high desert in homesteads and cattle ranches. The school board had decided one central location made the most sense, but they had not considered that Miss Flora Hart would be the one walking those miles 3 days a week to reach the children too young or too needed at home to make the journey into town. The September heat pressed down like a physical weight. Flora's cotton dress clung to her back, and she could feel sweat trickling down her spine. She had been walking for 20 minutes, and already her canteen felt lighter than she would have liked. Lizards skittered across the red dirt road, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional twisted juniper tree offering patches of shade too small to be useful. Flora had come west from Ohio 6 months ago, answering an advertisement for a schoolteacher. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and possessed of a teaching certificate from a women's academy in Cleveland. Her parents had died of influenza the previous winter, leaving her alone in the world with nothing but an education and a determination to make something of herself. The West had seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start, a place where her past did not matter and her future could be whatever she made it. She had not anticipated the isolation, the heat, or the sheer physical demands of the position. The advertisement had failed to mention that teaching in St. Elmo meant walking dozens of miles each week across open desert, carrying supplies and lesson plans, arriving exhausted and dusty to instruct children who often fell asleep over their readers. But Flora was stubborn. Her mother had always said it was her defining characteristic, this refusal to admit defeat. So she walked, day after day, teaching reading and arithmetic and geography to children whose families could not spare them for the trip to town. The Henderson Ranch appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a collection of low adobe buildings clustered around a windmill. Flora could see the blades turning lazily in the breeze, hear the creak of the pump mechanism carrying across the still air. 3 children waited on the porch, and she quickened her pace despite her exhaustion. Miss Hart, Miss Hart. The youngest Henderson, a gap-toothed girl of 7 named Annie, ran to meet her. "We thought you might not come today on account of the heat." "I made a promise," Flora said, smiling despite her dry throat. "A promise is a promise." She spent 2 hours with the Henderson children, drilling them on their multiplication tables and having them read aloud from McGuffey's Reader. Their mother, Martha Henderson, offered Flora water and a biscuit, which she accepted gratefully. Then it was back into the heat, walking 3 miles southeast to the Cordova place where 4 more children waited. By the time Flora completed her rounds and began the long walk back to St. Elmo, the sun had started its descent toward the western mountains. The worst heat of the day had passed, but Flora felt wrung out like an old dishcloth. Her feet ached in her boots, blisters forming on both heels. Her dress was stiff with dried sweat and dust, and she knew her face must be burned despite the wide-brimmed hat she wore. She was still 2 miles from town when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. Flora stepped to the side of the road, expecting someone to pass. Instead, the rider slowed and stopped beside her. She looked up into the face of a man she had seen around St. Elmo, but never spoken to. He sat easy in the saddle, a man probably in his middle 20s with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. He wore the typical costume of a working cowboy, dusty denim pants, a faded blue shirt, leather chaps, and a worn hat that had seen years of service. But it was his eyes that caught Flora's attention, a warm hazel color filled with genuine concern. "Miss Hart," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Name's Quinton Lawson. I work the Bar 7 ranch. Saw you walking and thought you might appreciate a ride back to town." Flora hesitated. She had been raised with strict ideas about propriety, and accepting rides from strange men definitely violated those rules. But her feet hurt so badly and the town still seemed impossibly far away. "I would not want to impose," she said carefully. "No imposition." Quinton swung down from his horse with easy grace. "I am heading that way regardless. Please, you look about done in." There was such kindness in his voice that Flora found herself agreeing. Quinton helped her onto his horse, a sturdy bay gelding, then swung up behind her. Flora sat very straight, acutely aware of his presence behind her, the strength of the arm he kept loosely around her waist to steady her in the saddle. "Heard you have been walking out to the homesteads to teach," Quinton said as they started toward town. "That is a lot of miles in this heat." "The children need education," Flora replied. "Someone has to bring it to them." "Noble work," Quinton said, "but seems like there should be an easier way. That is a lot to ask of anyone, all that walking." They rode in silence for a while. Flora found herself relaxing slightly, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. She could feel the heat radiating from Quinton's body behind her, smell the scent of leather and sage and honest sweat. It was not unpleasant. "How long have you been in St. Elmo?" Quinton asked. 6 months, Flora said. "I came from Ohio." "That is a far piece. What brings a lady from Ohio all the way to New Mexico?" Flora considered her answer carefully. "A fresh start. My parents passed and there was nothing left for me there. I saw the advertisement for a teacher and it seemed like fate." "Sorry about your folks," Quinton said, and she could hear the genuine sympathy in his voice. "That must have been hard." "It was. But we go on, do we not? We find new purposes, new places to belong." "That we do," Quinton agreed. They reached the edge of St. Elmo as the sun touched the mountaintops, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Quinton rode directly to the boarding house where Flora rented a small room. "Thank you," Flora said as he helped her down. "You saved my feet, I think." "Happy to help." Quinton smiled and Flora felt something flutter in her chest. He had a good smile, warm and genuine. "Miss Hart, if you do not mind my saying, you ought to be careful walking those distances alone. This is wild country still. All kinds of dangers out there." "I appreciate your concern," Flora said, straightening her spine, "but I have a job to do and I will do it." Quinton's smile widened. "I can see that. You have got sand, Miss Hart. I admire that." He touched his hat brim again. "Evening to you." Flora watched him ride away, feeling something she had not felt in a long time. Interest. Possibility. She shook her head, gathering her bag and heading inside. She had not come west to find romance. She had come to teach, to build a life of purpose and independence. But that night, as she soaked her aching feet in a basin of cool water, she found herself thinking about hazel eyes and a kind voice, about strong arms steadying her in the saddle and the warmth of another person close beside her. The next week followed the same exhausting pattern. Flora walked to the homesteads, taught her lessons, and walked back. Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, she made her rounds, covering between 10 and 15 miles depending on which families needed her services. The other days she taught in the St. Elmo schoolhouse, instructing the children whose families lived close enough to send them to town. She saw Quinton Lawson twice more that week, both times in passing on the street. He tipped his hat each time, called her by name, and asked how she was faring. Such small courtesies, but they warmed something in Flora's lonely heart. Saturday morning dawned even hotter than usual. Flora stood on the porch of the boarding house, staring out at the shimmering heat waves rising from the desert floor, and seriously considered canceling her lessons. But the Cordova children were preparing for their examinations, and the Henderson boy needed extra help with his reading. She could not let them down. She filled her canteen, packed her bag, and set out walking. The heat hit her like a physical blow the moment she stepped off the shaded porch. By the time she reached the Cordova place, her vision was swimming and her head pounded. She pushed through the lessons, but Maria Cordova insisted she rest for an hour in the cool of their adobe house before continuing. Flora dozed fitfully in a corner while the Cordova children played quietly outside. When she woke, the sun had moved west, but the heat remained oppressive. She thanked Maria, accepted more water, and began walking toward the Henderson ranch. Halfway there, Flora realized she was in trouble. Her canteen was empty, and the heat seemed to be pressing down harder than ever. The road ahead wavered and danced, and she felt dizzy, disconnected from her body. She kept walking because stopping seemed more dangerous than continuing. If she could just reach the Hendersons, if she could just make it a little further. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Flora stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again. Her vision was narrowing, darkening at the edges. She knew these symptoms. Heat stroke. She needed water, shade, needed to cool down. But there was nothing out here, just endless desert and burning sun. She heard hoofbeats but could not tell if they were real or imagined. Everything seemed distant and dreamlike. She stumbled again and this time could not catch herself. The ground rushed up to meet her, and then strong hands caught her, lifted her. "Miss Hart, Flora," she knew that voice. "Quinton." She tried to speak, but her mouth was too dry. "Hold on," he said urgently. "I have got you, just hold on." Cool water touched her lips. She swallowed greedily, choking slightly. More water, blessed and cool, poured over her head and neck. The world slowly came back into focus. She was sitting on the ground, leaning against Quinton's chest, his arm supporting her. His horse stood nearby, reins trailing. "Easy now," Quinton said softly. "Small sips, not too fast." Flora took another small drink from his canteen. Her head was starting to clear, though she still felt weak and shaky. "What are you doing out here?" she managed to ask. "Looking for you," Quinton said. "One of the cowboys rode past the Cordova place and saw you leave. Mentioned how hot it was, how you looked unsteady. I got worried. Good thing I did." "I am fine," Flora said automatically, then realized how ridiculous that sounded given her current position. "You almost died," Quinton said, and there was something fierce in his voice now. "This cannot continue, Flora. You cannot keep doing this. The heat alone could kill you, never mind the other dangers out here. I have a job to do. Your job is not worth your life." He shifted, helping her sit up straighter. "There has got to be a better way." They sat in the shade of a twisted juniper tree, the only cover visible in any direction. Quinton kept offering her water, and slowly Flora's strength returned. She felt foolish and embarrassed, but also grateful. If he had not come looking for her, she might have collapsed out here with no one to help, might have died on this dusty road. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You saved my life." "Just happened to be riding by," Quinton said, but his voice was tight with emotion. Flora, promise me you will not do this anymore, not in this heat. It is too dangerous. The children need their lessons. The children need you alive. He looked at her intently, and Flora saw real fear in his eyes, fear for her. Please. Flora wanted to argue, wanted to insist on her independence and her commitment to her work. But the truth was she had nearly died today, and the thought terrified her. She nodded slowly. I will be more careful, she conceded. Perhaps I can arrange different days, cooler times. That would be a start. Quinton helped her to her feet. She swayed slightly, and he steadied her with both hands on her arms. Let me take you back to town. You need to rest. This time Flora did not hesitate to accept the ride. Quinton lifted her into the saddle with ease, then mounted behind her. Flora let herself lean back against his chest, too exhausted to maintain propriety. His arms around her felt safe, protective. She closed her eyes and allowed herself this moment of weakness. I have been thinking, Quinton said as they rode, about your situation, about those children scattered across the territory. There has got to be a solution. If you think of one, I am listening, Flora said tiredly. I am working on it. They rode the rest of the way in silence. Quinton delivered Flora to the boarding house and helped her down with gentle hands. Mrs. Patterson, the landlady, came bustling out, took one look at Flora's condition and began scolding. Good heavens, child, you look half dead. Get inside right now. I will bring water and cool cloths. Honestly, this walking business in such heat, it is pure foolishness. Flora let herself be led inside, but she turned back to look at Quinton. He stood holding his horse's reins, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Concern, certainly, but something else too. Something warmer, more personal. Thank you, she said again. Take care of yourself, Flora, he replied. Promise me. I promise. She watched him ride away, feeling that flutter in her chest again, stronger this time. Quinton Lawson had saved her life today. More than that, he had shown her kindness without expectation, had gone out of his way to ensure her safety. In Flora's experience, such genuine caring was rare. The next week, Flora reluctantly canceled her homestead visits, citing the dangerous heat. She sent messages with families who came to town, promising to make up the lessons once the weather cooled. She hated admitting defeat, but Quinton's words haunted her. Her job was not worth her life, and if she died out there on the desert road, who would teach those children then? She focused on her schoolhouse lessons, preparing curriculum for the fall term when more families would send their children to town. She tried not to think about Quinton Lawson, but found herself looking for him whenever she went outside, found herself remembering the feeling of his arms around her, the genuine concern in his voice. 10 days after her collapse, Flora was preparing lessons at the schoolhouse when she heard horses outside. She went to the door and found Quinton dismounting, along with 2 other cowboys she recognized from town. But it was what they were hauling behind them that made her step outside in surprise. Lumber, wagon loads of it, along with bags of nails, tools, and what looked like tar paper for roofing. Quinton saw her and smiled, that warm, genuine smile that made her heart skip. Miss Hart, he said, walking over, got something to show you. I can see that, Flora said, confused. What is all this? Come on. He gestured toward the horses. We are taking a ride. Where? You will see. Trust me. Flora hesitated only a moment before fetching her hat and locking the schoolhouse door. Whatever Quinton was up to, her curiosity had gotten the better of her. He helped her onto his horse, and they rode out of town heading north, the wagons following behind. After about 20 minutes, Quinton guided them off the main road onto a smaller track. They crested a small rise, and Flora saw their destination. A flat, cleared area near a spring-fed pond, cottonwood trees offering shade, and the distant shapes of the Henderson Ranch visible to the east and the Cordova place to the west. "This is roughly the midpoint between the northern homesteads," Quinton said. "The Henderson place, the Cordovas, the Mitchells, and the Small spreads beyond. This land belongs to the Bar 7. My boss, Mr. Garrett, has agreed to donate it for community use." Flora looked around, still not quite understanding. "It is a beautiful spot. It will be better." Quinton dismounted and helped her down. "We are going to build a school here. A second schoolhouse, right in the middle of the homestead territory. No more walking 5 miles in the heat. The families can send their children here, and you only have to ride a couple miles from town instead of making that whole circuit." Flora stared at him, unable to speak. The implications of what he was saying slowly sank in. A second school, centrally located. It would solve all her problems, would mean the homestead children could get regular instruction without her risking her life walking the territory. "I do not understand," she managed. "How? Why?" Quinton took off his hat, turning it in his hands in a gesture that seemed almost nervous. "After I found you collapsed that day, I could not stop thinking about it. About you walking all those miles, risking so much just to teach. It did not sit right with me. So I talked to Mr. Garrett, and he liked the idea. Said the community needs more civilization, and a school would be good for property values. Then I talked to the Henderson family and the Cordovas and the others. They all agreed to help with the building. We have been gathering materials for the past week." "You did this," Flora said slowly. "For me." Quinton looked directly at her, and the emotion in his hazel eyes made her breath catch. "I could not stand the thought of you dying out there on the road. If something happened to you because we did not have proper schools in the right places, I would never forgive myself. So yes, I did this for you, but also for those children, for the community. It is the right thing to do." Flora felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever done something like this for her, had taken her problems and worked to solve them so completely. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will teach here," Quinton replied. "Say you will let us help keep you safe." "Yes," Flora whispered. "Yes, of course." Over the next 3 weeks, Flora watched in amazement as the school took shape. Quinton was there every day after his ranch work finished, hammering and sawing alongside the homestead fathers and other cowboys from the Bar 7. The Henderson family donated chairs, the Cordovas brought a stove for heating, and someone in town donated a bell. Women brought food for the workers, and the whole community seemed to come together around the project. Flora visited the construction site regularly, bringing water and food, offering suggestions about the layout. She watched Quinton work, admiring the easy strength with which he handled the heavy lumber, the skill of his carpentry. He had pushed up his sleeves in the heat, and she found herself noticing the play of muscles in his forearms, the way sweat made his hair curl slightly at his neck. She was falling for him. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She had come west seeking independence, a life of purpose beyond marriage and children. But Quinton made her want things she had told herself did not matter, made her imagine a different kind of future. He sought her out during his breaks, bringing her water, asking her opinion on various aspects of the building. They talked about everything and nothing, easy conversations that felt natural and right. Flora learned that Quinton had been orphaned young, that he had worked his way west as a cowboy, that he dreamed of having his own ranch someday. He listened with genuine interest to her stories about Ohio, about her education, about her hopes for her students. "You really love teaching," he observed one afternoon as they sat in the shade of the cottonwoods, watching the other men work. "I do," Flora agreed. "There is something miraculous about watching a child learn to read, about seeing their world expand with knowledge." I want to give these children opportunities, chances to make something of themselves regardless of their circumstances. Like you did, Quinton said. Like I am trying to do. Flora looked at the school taking shape before them. This will help so much. You have no idea what this means to me. What you have done. Quinton shifted slightly closer. I am starting to get an idea of what it means to me. Flora turned to look at him and found him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. There was desire there, certainly, but also something deeper. Respect. Admiration. Maybe even love. Quinton, she started, not sure what she wanted to say. I know we have not known each other long, he said. And I know you came here to be independent, to build your own life. I respect that, Flora. I admire it. But I have to tell you, these past weeks working on this school, spending time with you, I have felt something I have never felt before. Like I found something I did not even know I was looking for. Flora's breath caught. I have felt it too, she admitted softly. I told myself I did not want this, did not need romance or attachment. But then you came along, and everything changed. I do not want to pressure you, Quinton said. I do not want to be another man trying to control your choices or limit your possibilities. But I would like to court you, Flora. Properly court you, with intentions of marriage if you would have me. I want to support your teaching, support your dreams. I want to be the kind of partner who makes your life better, not smaller. Flora felt tears spill down her cheeks. She reached out and took his hand, rough and calloused from hard work. I would like that, she said. I would like that very much. Quinton smiled, that beautiful warm smile, and squeezed her hand. Then that is what we will do. We will take it slow, do it right. But Flora, I want you to know I am in this. I am already in this so deep I cannot see the surface anymore. Me too, Flora whispered. Me too. The school was completed in late October, just as the summer heat finally broke and cooler fall weather moved into New Mexico. The whole community gathered for the dedication ceremony. Flora stood on the small porch Quinton had insisted on building and rang the bell for the first time. The clear sound carried across the desert, and everyone cheered. Thank you, Flora said, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. Thank you all for making this possible. This school will serve generations of children, will give them opportunities and education. I am honored to be your teacher, and I promise to serve this community with everything I have. More cheers, and then Quinton was beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. He did not say anything, just stood close enough that their shoulders brushed, a silent show of support. Flora felt a rush of love so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. The school opened for classes the following Monday. 15 children attended that first day, children from the scattered homesteads who had never been able to attend regular school before. Flora taught them reading and writing, arithmetic and geography, history and natural science. She watched their faces light up with understanding, watched them discover the joy of learning, and felt profound satisfaction. Quinton picked her up after school, riding over from the Bar 7 ranch. It had become their routine. He would escort her back to St. Elmo, and they would talk the entire way, sharing their days, making plans, falling deeper in love with every passing mile. How were the students today? He asked as they rode. Wonderful, Flora said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. Little Sarah Mitchell read an entire page without help. And the Cordova boy, Manuel, he has a gift for mathematics. He solved problems I thought would take him days. You love this, Quinton observed, smiling. I do. And it is all possible because of you, because of what you built. We built it, Quinton corrected. The whole community came together. I just got the ball rolling. You did more than that. Flora turned in the saddle to look at him. You saw a problem and you solved it. You took action when no one else did. That is not nothing, Quinton. He looked pleased and slightly embarrassed. I just could not stand seeing you suffer, could not stomach the idea of something happening to you. Call it selfish motivation. I call it love, Flora said softly. Quinton reined in the horse and turned Flora more fully in his arms. That is what it is, he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. I love you, Flora Hart. I have loved you since the first time I saw you walking that desert road, stubborn and determined and refusing to give up. I love your passion for teaching, your kindness with children, your strength. I love everything about you. I love you too, Flora said, her heart so full it ached. I love your goodness, your willingness to help, the way you build solutions instead of just complaining about problems. I love how you see me, really see me, and support what I am trying to do. I love you, Quinton Lawson. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Flora felt the last of her resistance crumble away. She had come west seeking independence, but she had found something better. She had found partnership, true partnership with a man who valued her dreams as much as his own. The courtship continued through the fall and into winter. Quinton called on Flora officially every Sunday, sitting in Mrs. Patterson's parlor and talking for hours. He took her to the church social in November and the Christmas dance in December. He met her standards for propriety while making his intentions perfectly clear. He wanted to marry her, wanted to build a life together, and he was willing to wait for her to be ready. Flora found herself more and more ready with each passing day. Quinton had proven himself again and again. When she needed books for the school, he organized a donation drive. When the schoolhouse stove smoked, he rebuilt the chimney. When winter storms made the roads impassable, he personally delivered messages to the families, ensuring they knew when school would resume. He supported her teaching completely, never suggesting she should do less or be smaller to suit him. Christmas Eve found them at the community dance in St. Elmo. The small church hall had been decorated with pine boughs and candles, and someone had brought a fiddle. Flora danced with Quinton, his hand warm and sure on her waist, and felt completely happy. "Flora," Quinton said as they swayed to a slow waltz, "I know we have only been courting a few months. I know the proper thing would be to wait longer. But I also know what I want, and I do not see the point in waiting when I am already certain." Flora's heart began to race. She looked up at him, seeing the nervousness and hope in his eyes. "I want to marry you," Quinton continued. "I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to support your teaching and build a life together here in New Mexico. I want children someday if you want them, but I will love you just the same if you do not. I want everything with you, Flora. Will you marry me?" Flora did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Quinton, I will marry you." He kissed her right there in the middle of the dance floor, not caring who saw. The other dancers cheered and clapped, and someone shouted congratulations. Flora held on to Quinton and thought about how strange life was, how she had come west running from grief and loneliness, and had found love in the most unexpected place. They were married in February of 1884 in the St. Elmo Church, with the whole community attending. Flora wore a dress of cream-colored wool that Martha Henderson had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that would not bloom for months, so she carried a bouquet of dried sage and juniper tied with ribbon instead. Quinton wore his Sunday best, his hair neatly trimmed, looking more handsome than Flora had ever seen him. "I promise to love you and honor you," Quinton said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to support your dreams and be your true partner. I promise to build a life with you that honors both our hopes. This I pledge before God and this community." "I promise to love you and honor you," Flora repeated. "I promise to be your true partner and support your dreams as you support mine." I promise to build a life with you filled with purpose and love. This I pledge before God and this community." They exchanged simple gold bands, and the preacher pronounced them husband and wife. Quinton kissed her tenderly, and Flora felt a sense of rightness settle deep in her bones. This was where she was meant to be. This was who she was meant to be with. They spent their wedding night in a small house Quinton had rented on the edge of St. Elmo. It was not much, just 2 rooms, but it was theirs. Quinton carried Flora over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the main room. "Our home," he said softly. "Our home," Flora agreed. That night, in the privacy of their marriage bed, they came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies, creating the intimate bond that would sustain them through the years ahead. Flora had been nervous about this aspect of marriage, had heard whispered horror stories from married women back in Ohio. But Quinton was patient and gentle, making sure she felt pleasure as well as he did, treating her with the same respect and care he showed in every other aspect of their relationship. Afterwards, lying in his arms in the darkness, Flora felt completely at peace. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Quinton replied, kissing her forehead. "Always will." The spring term at the Homestead School started in March, and Flora threw herself into teaching with renewed energy. Being married to Quinton had not diminished her passion for education. If anything, having his support made her more confident, more ambitious in her plans. She started a lending library at the school, organized spelling bees and recitation contests, began teaching the older students more advanced subjects. Quinton, meanwhile, had saved enough money to make a down payment on a small ranch just east of St. Elmo. It was only 320 acres, barely enough to run cattle, but it was theirs. He worked the bar 7 during the day to bring in steady money, then spent his evenings working on their ranch, building fences, improving the small house that came with the property, planning for the future. They moved into the ranch house in May, and Flora loved it immediately despite its rough condition. It had 3 rooms, a covered porch, and a view of the mountains that took her breath away. Quinton promised to add more rooms as they needed them, to make improvements as money allowed. Flora did not care about the worn floors or the leaky roof. She cared about the fact that it was theirs, that they had built it together through hard work and determination. That summer, Flora discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when Doc Henderson confirmed it, she felt a rush of emotions. Joy, certainly, but also fear. How would she continue teaching? What if something went wrong? She was 23 years old and about to become a mother, and suddenly all her careful plans seemed uncertain. Quinton found her sitting on the porch that evening, staring out at the sunset, clearly troubled. He sat beside her and took her hand. "What is wrong?" he asked gently. "I am pregnant," Flora said. Quinton's face lit up with pure joy. "That is wonderful. Flora, we are going to have a baby. Why do you look so worried?" "I do not want to stop teaching," she admitted. "I have worked so hard to build that school to reach those children. But I do not know how to be a mother and a teacher at the same time." Quinton squeezed her hand. "We will figure it out," he said firmly. "If you want to keep teaching, we will find a way to make that work. Maybe you teach until you are close to your time, then take a few months with the baby, then go back. Or maybe we find an assistant teacher to help. Or maybe you do something else entirely. The point is, we will figure it out together. Your dreams do not end because we are having a child." Flora felt tears of relief spill over. "You mean that?" "Of course I mean it. Flora, I married a teacher. I married a strong, passionate, ambitious woman who wants to change the world through education. Having a baby does not change who you are." We will adapt, we will find solutions, just like we always do. Flora threw her arms around him, holding tight. How did I get so lucky? She whispered. I am the lucky one, Quinton replied. I get to spend my life with you. Flora taught through the fall, her pregnancy gradually becoming obvious to everyone in the community. The mothers rallied around her, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes, expressing admiration that she was still teaching so late into her pregnancy. Flora was determined to work as long as possible, partially because she loved teaching and partially because the school still needed her. In December, with winter settling over New Mexico and Flora very near her time, she finally agreed to take leave from teaching. Martha Henderson, who had some education herself, agreed to substitute until Flora could return. It was not a perfect solution, but it would keep the school running. Their son was born on a cold January night in 1885, with Doc Henderson and Martha both attending the birth. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Flora feared she might not survive. But Quinton never left her side, holding her hand, encouraging her, believing in her strength even when she doubted it herself. Finally, after hours of labor, their son entered the world with a healthy cry. He is perfect, Quinton said, tears streaming down his face as he held the tiny baby. Flora, he is absolutely perfect. They named him Samuel Quinn Lawson after Quinton's father and with a nod to Quinton's own name. Little Samuel had his father's hazel eyes and his mother's stubborn chin, and from the very beginning, he was a fighter. The months after Samuel's birth were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Flora had never realized how much work a baby was, how completely they took over your life. She was up at all hours nursing, constantly doing laundry, worrying about every little sound Samuel made. But she also felt a love deeper than anything she had ever experienced, a fierce protective instinct that surprised her with its intensity. Quinton was a devoted father. He walked the floor with Samuel when the baby fussed, changed diapers without complaint, and took over the night feedings whenever he could by bringing Samuel to Flora, and then settling them both back to sleep. He never suggested that the baby was solely Flora's responsibility, never acted like helping with his own child was something special. He was simply present, engaged, doing his share. By spring, Flora was starting to feel more like herself. Samuel had settled into a routine, sleeping longer stretches at night, and Flora found herself missing teaching. She talked it over with Quinton, and they devised a plan. Flora would return to teaching 3 days a week instead of 5. On those days, Mrs. Patterson, who had become a good friend, would watch Samuel for a small fee. Quinton would arrange his ranch work so he could be home the other days, giving Flora time to prepare lessons and rest. It was not perfect, and there were difficult days when Samuel was fussy or Flora was exhausted or the logistics fell apart. But it worked. Flora returned to teaching in April, and while it was hard to leave Samuel those first few times, she also felt a sense of rightness. She was a mother now, yes, but she was still a teacher. Both identities could coexist. The Homestead children welcomed her back with enthusiasm, and Flora threw herself into the spring term with renewed purpose. She had missed this, the satisfaction of teaching, the joy of watching children learn and grow. Being a mother had not diminished her love of education. If anything, it had enhanced it, made her more determined to create a better world for all children, including her own son. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the next few years. Quinton's ranch slowly became more profitable, allowing them to hire occasional help and make improvements to the property. Flora continued teaching, adjusting her schedule as Samuel grew. Their son was a curious, energetic child who loved books and animals in equal measure. Flora taught him his letters before he was 3, and Quinton taught him to ride before he was 4. In the fall of 1887, Flora discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news brought pure joy. They knew what to expect now, felt confident in their ability to balance children and work and marriage. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and Flora taught almost until her delivery date. Their daughter, Caroline Mee Lawson, was born in March of 1888, an easier birth than Samuel's had been. She was a peaceful baby, content to sleep and watch the world with solemn blue eyes. Samuel was fascinated with his little sister, constantly wanting to help care for her, and Quinton was completely smitten. "2 children," he said one evening, holding Caroline while Samuel sat pressed against his side, all of them watching the sunset from the porch. "We have got 2 perfect children, a working ranch, your school. We have built something here, Flora, something real and lasting." Flora looked at her family, at the home they had created together, at the life they had built through hard work and love, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "We have," she agreed. "We have built something wonderful." The years passed in a blur of busy happiness. Samuel started at the homestead school when he was 6, sitting proudly in his mother's classroom. Caroline followed a few years later, equally enthusiastic about learning. Flora continued teaching, watching generations of children pass through her school, seeing the impact of education ripple through the community. Former students would visit, now grown, to thank her for teaching them to read, for opening their eyes to possibilities beyond the ranch or homestead. Quinton's ranch continued to grow. He never became rich, but they were comfortable, secure. He raised good cattle, maintained excellent relationships with buyers, and earned a reputation as an honest, fair rancher. He served on the school board, ensuring the homestead school remained funded and supported, and eventually helped establish 2 more small schools in distant parts of the territory. In 1895, New Mexico was making strides toward eventual statehood, and St. Elmo had grown into a proper town with a hotel, a bank, and 3 churches. The homestead school that Quinton had built remained central to the community, a testament to what one person's determination and another person's love could accomplish. Flora was 34 now, Quinton 36. Samuel was 10 and Caroline was 7, both thriving. Flora still taught, though she had cut back to 2 days a week, allowing her more time with her children and her husband. The community had hired a second teacher, a young woman from Denver, to handle the full-time instruction. Flora now served as the head teacher, overseeing curriculum and mentoring the new teacher, a role she found deeply satisfying. One warm evening in May, Flora and Quinton sat on their porch watching Samuel teach Caroline to rope fence posts while their dog barked enthusiastic encouragement. Quinton reached over and took Flora's hand, lacing their fingers together. "You ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Coming west, all of this?" Flora looked at him in surprise. "Regret it? Quinton, this is the best life I could have imagined, better than anything I dreamed of back in Ohio." "You gave up a lot," Quinton said. "You could have taught in a city school, had an easier life. Instead, you came out here to the middle of nowhere, married a cowboy, lived through hard times and uncertainty." "I chose this," Flora said firmly. "I chose you. And I would make the same choice again every single time. Quinton, you gave me everything I wanted. You built me a school so I could teach safely. You supported my work when most men would have demanded I stop. You have been a true partner in every sense of the word. We have built this life together, and I love every single part of it." "Even the hard parts?" Quinton asked. "The years of struggling to make the ranch work, the times we were not sure we could pay our bills, even those," Flora confirmed, "because we faced them together." "Quinton, The day you found me collapsed on that desert road, the day you decided to build that school, that was the day my real life began. Everything before was just waiting for you." Quinton pulled her close and kissed her temple. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Flora whispered. "Always." They sat together watching their children play, the sun setting over the New Mexico landscape they both loved, and Flora felt complete contentment. She had come west alone, seeking purpose and independence. She had found those things, but she had also found so much more. She had found love, partnership, family, and home. She had found Quinton. The homestead school continued to serve the community for decades. Samuel eventually became a teacher himself, taking over his mother's position when Flora finally retired at age 55. Caroline became a doctor, one of the first women physicians in New Mexico, and returned to St. Elmo to practice medicine, serving the same families her mother had taught. Quinton and Flora lived to see New Mexico become a state in 1912. They stood together at the statehood celebration in Santa Fe, now elderly, but still holding hands, still devoted to each other after nearly 3 decades of marriage. They saw their children marry and give them grandchildren, saw the schools they had helped establish educate hundreds of children, saw the wild territory they had known become civilized and prosperous. On a warm autumn evening in 1920, Quinton and Flora sat on the porch of their ranch house, now much expanded and improved from the rough building it had been in 1884. They were both in their 70s now, gray-haired and slower, but still sharp-minded and deeply in love. "Do you remember the first time I saw you?" Quinton asked, his voice rougher with age but still warm. "Walking down that dusty road, determined and stubborn, refusing to give up even though the heat was killing you." "I remember," Flora said, smiling. "And I remember thinking you had kind eyes, that your voice sounded safe." "I knew right then," Quinton said. "The moment I saw you, I knew you were going to change my life. I just did not know how much." "You changed mine," Flora replied. "You took a lonely schoolteacher and gave her a home, a family, a life beyond anything she had imagined possible. You built me a school, Quinton. But more than that, you built me a life." "We built it together," Quinton corrected gently. "Everything we have, everything we have done, we did it together." Flora leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the same sense of peace she had felt for decades whenever she was close to him. "Together," she agreed. "Always together." They sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, holding hands as they had for nearly 40 years. Two people who had found each other in the vastness of the West and built something lasting. The schoolhouse Quinton had built still stood, a permanent marker of his love and Flora's dedication. The community they had helped shape continued to thrive. Their children and grandchildren carried on their legacy of education, hard work, and devotion to community. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Flora thought about that day so long ago when she had nearly died on the desert road, when a cowboy had found her and saved her life. She thought about the school he had built, about the love that had grown from his kindness and her gratitude. She thought about the years of partnership, of shared dreams and mutual support, of building a life based on respect and genuine affection. "Thank you," she whispered to Quinton. "Thank you for everything." "Thank you," he replied, kissing her forehead. "For saying yes, for building this life with me, for being my partner in everything. You made me better, Flora. You made everything better." They sat together under the New Mexico stars, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their courtship, their marriage, the birth of their children, and all the years of their life together. They had walked through heat and hardship, through challenges and triumphs, and they had done it hand in hand. The schoolteacher and the cowboy, two souls who had found each other in the vastness of the West and created something beautiful, something lasting, something true. Their love story became part of St. Elmo's history, told and retold to new generations. The school Quinton built was eventually replaced with a larger, modern building, but a plaque was installed marking the original site, honoring the dedication of Flora Hart Lawson, who had walked through killing heat to teach, and Quinton Lawson, who had built her a closer school and in doing so had won her heart. Their story became an example of what love looked like when it was built on respect, partnership, and genuine care for another person's dreams and well-being. Samuel and Caroline made sure their parents' story was never forgotten, that future generations understood what those two remarkable people had accomplished. Not just the school, though that was important. But more significantly, they had shown that marriage could be a partnership of equals, that a man could support a woman's ambitions without diminishing his own, that love could be both romantic and practical, passionate and enduring. Flora lived to be 78, passing peacefully in her sleep with Quinton holding her hand. She had taught thousands of children over her career, had watched the territory become a state, had seen education transform from a luxury to a right for all children. She died knowing she had made a difference, had changed lives, had built something meaningful. Quinton followed her 6 months later, as if he could not bear to be separated from her for long. The community mourned them both, understanding that they had lost two of the pioneers who had shaped St. Elmo into what it had become. At their joint memorial service, former students stood up one after another to share how Flora had changed their lives, how her teaching had opened doors they had not known existed. And everyone spoke of Quinton's love for his wife, how he had shown an entire community what it meant to truly support the person you loved. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking both their ranch and the site where Quinton had built the first homestead school. Their tombstone was simple, bearing their names, dates, and a single inscription that Samuel and Caroline had chosen together. Together, they built a life of love, learning, and lasting legacy. Years later, when the New Mexico Historical Society wrote about the development of rural education in the territory, Flora and Quinton's story was featured prominently. Historians pointed to the homestead school as an innovative solution to the challenges of educating children in scattered frontier communities. They noted Flora's dedication and Quinton's support as exemplary of the pioneer spirit that had built the West. But beyond the historical significance, their story resonated because it was fundamentally a love story. It was about two people who found each other against the odds, who built a life together based on mutual respect and support, who faced challenges as partners and celebrated triumphs as a team. It was about a woman who refused to give up on her calling, and a man who loved her enough to build solutions instead of barriers. The schoolteacher had walked through heat to teach, determined to bring education to children who desperately needed it. The cowboy had seen her struggle and had built her a closer school, solving her practical problems while winning her heart. Together, they had created not just a building, but a legacy. Not just a marriage, but a partnership that lasted a lifetime and influenced generations. Their grandchildren told the story to their own children, and those children to their children, until Flora and Quinton Lawson became part of the mythology of the American West. Not gunfighters or outlaws, not famous names known across the nation, but two ordinary people who did extraordinary things through love and dedication. They represented the thousands of unnamed pioneers who built communities, established schools and churches, raised families, and turned wilderness into civilization through sheer determination and hard work. In St. Elmo, Their names never faded. The main elementary school, built in 1947, was named Lawson Elementary in their honor. A scholarship fund was established for students pursuing teaching degrees. Their ranch house was eventually donated to the Historical Society and preserved as a museum, showing visitors how frontier families had lived, loved, and built their futures. The story of the schoolteacher and the cowboy became a reminder of what mattered most in life. Not wealth or fame, but love and purpose. Not individual achievement, but partnership and community. Not the easiest path, but the right path, walked together with someone who valued your dreams as much as their own. Flora had come west seeking independence and had found something better. Interdependence, partnership, a love that supported rather than confined. Quinton had been working as a cowboy with dreams of his own ranch and had found something better. A partner who matched his determination and strength. A love that inspired him to be better, to do more, to build not just for himself but for a community. Together, they had walked through the heat of desert summers and the cold of mountain winters. They had faced drought and hardship, had struggled to make ends meet, had worried about their children and mourned losses. But they had also known joy and satisfaction, had celebrated successes, had watched their children grow and thrive, had built something lasting. Their love story was not a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was real. It was the story of two people who chose each other every day, who worked together to solve problems, who supported each other's dreams while building shared ones. It was a love story for the ages, not because it was perfect, but because it was true. And in the end, that truth was what made it beautiful. Flora and Quinton Lawson had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that continued to touch lives long after they were gone. The school Quinton built had educated thousands. The example Flora set had inspired generations of teachers. Their partnership had shown countless couples what marriage could be at its best. The schoolteacher had walked through heat to teach, and the cowboy had built her a closer school. In doing so, they had built something even more important, a love that lasted a lifetime, a partnership that changed a community, and a story that would never be forgotten. Their names were carved not just on a tombstone, but in the history of New Mexico, in the memories of everyone they had touched, and in the hearts of all who heard their story and dreamed of finding a love just as true, just as lasting, just as real.